For years, the work looked almost uneventful. At a research station on the edge of Antarctica, instruments pointed toward the sky and produced lines of numbers. Day after day, season after season, the records grew. Sheets of measurements accumulated in drawers. Graphs extended a little farther across the page. Nothing about the routine suggested discovery. The atmosphere above Earth was expected to behave in familiar ways. Ozone, the thin layer high overhead that absorbs harmful ultraviolet radiation, was something scientists monitored, not something they expected to lose. That confidence depended on a simple assumption. If the atmosphere changed, the instruments would reveal it. If the instruments were working, the numbers could be trusted. Then, one season, the numbers stopped behaving. The readings arriving from Antarctica were far lower than expected. Not slightly lower, not part of an obvious trend. They appeared to drop into territory that seemed difficult to explain. The measurements looked wrong. On paper, an instrument problem felt more believable than a sudden transformation of the atmosphere itself. Instruments drift, components fail, calibration can be lost. A mistake inside a machine is usually easier to accept than a mistake inside an entire understanding of the sky. The strange values were noted, and the monitoring continued. Months passed. The Antarctic winter ended. Spring returned. The instruments began recording again, and the same pattern appeared. The numbers fell sharply once more. What had seemed like an isolated anomaly now had a twin. The measurements from one year resembled the measurements from another. The same season, the same region, the same unexpected decline. The explanation that the instrument had briefly malfunctioned remained possible. But it was becoming less comfortable. A faulty measurement can happen once. A faulty measurement repeating itself in the same way is harder to dismiss. The records continued to accumulate. One year became several. Scientists could now place the seasonal drops beside one another. Stacked together, the measurements created a new image. Not a single strange reading, not an isolated mistake. A pattern.
Yes, the drop starts at
Each Antarctic spring seemed to reveal the same disappearance.
Stable and validated.
The atmosphere was behaving as though ozone were being removed. Yet the explanation still felt incomplete. Nothing visible appeared to be happening above Antarctica. There was no crack in the sky, no obvious sign of collapse. The protective layer still existed in the public imagination exactly as it always had. The contradiction deepened. The more reliable the measurements appeared, the less they fit expectations.
There it is again.
By the middle of the 1980s, the growing collection of observations could no longer be treated as scattered oddities. Researchers assembled the records and compared them across years. What emerged was not a problem with a machine.
The instruments continue operating.
It was evidence of recurring atmospheric depletion. The meaning of the data changed. The numbers themselves had not changed. The values written into notebooks years earlier were exactly the same values they had always been. What changed was the interpretation. A reading once treated as suspicious now looked like a warning. A measurement once considered implausible now appeared disturbingly plausible. The anomaly was becoming reality. Yet one question remained. How large was this phenomenon? The measurements came from specific locations. They revealed what was happening above the observing stations, but they could not immediately show the full geography of the event. The atmosphere still held part of the answer out of view. Then another source of evidence entered the story. Satellite observations provided a different perspective. Instead of individual records from the ground, they offered a view across an entire region. When those observations were assembled into maps, Antarctica acquired a new shape. A darkened region appeared over the continent. The depleted area was not a point. It was not a local curiosity. It spread across a vast section of the Antarctic atmosphere. The image carried a strange familiarity. Scientists were seeing something new, yet they had already encountered it years earlier. The shape on the map was the same phenomenon hidden inside the old measurements. The satellite images did not create the discovery. They revealed its scale. What had once existed only as suspicious numbers in a logbook had become visible geography. The sky itself had acquired a wound that could be mapped. At that point, the remaining doubt began to collapse. If the original readings had been caused by faulty instruments, independent observations should not have reproduced the same story. Yet they did. Different methods, different perspectives, the same disappearance. The temporary explanation that the measurements were wrong could no longer carry the weight placed upon it. Reality kept returning in the same form.
Stacked chronologically,
Each
these
new
satellite
observation
images confirm
strengthened a
the
conclusion
completion
that
of
once
Antarctic.
seemed
The
impossible.
phenomenon remains unmistakable.
The story often appears obvious in hindsight. Today, the image of the Antarctic ozone hole is familiar. The maps seem clear. The depletion looks undeniable. But that certainty arrived only after years of repetition. The atmosphere did not suddenly reveal its secret. The evidence accumulated slowly until the old explanation stopped working. And when that happened, the beginning of the story changed. Those first low readings no longer looked like bad data. They no longer looked like malfunctioning instruments or temporary mistakes. They became something else entirely. The scientist recording ordinary measurements at a remote Antarctic station had already seen the first visible sign of a planetary environmental reversal. The numbers were accurate from the start. Only their meaning had been hidden. In the end, the ozone hole maps and the original measurements tell the same story. One appears as a dark region over Antarctica. The other appears as figures written into a record book. Together, they transform an apparent error into a discovery. The atmosphere had been changing long before anyone could see it. The warning arrived first as numbers.